Good morning, welcome to the farm. So today we're talking about the basics of square foot gardening. So I want to cover just kind of how to get everything set up and how to make your plan and the types of containers, the types of soil mix and things like that. As the season progresses, I would love to take each vegetable from start to finish with you and talk about how to plant and how to care for and how to harvest from those plants. So let's talk about containers. You can use any container that you want to for square foot gardening. So you can do a pot up on your porch. Something like that is going to have a bottom on it. Something like this, where you're putting it down into more of a garden setting and it's a little bit bigger of a container, you're going to want something that does not have a bottom on it. So when you go to like Amazon, and by the way, you can go to rockfishfarm.com, you can see the link to these containers and some other options too. I've got some round ones, they come in a lot of different sizes. So these type of containers, when you go for a true raised bed container, they're not going to have bottoms on them, which is great. You can get several different heights. This year I've gone with a 12-inch height, and I'm excited about that because you can plant more things like your potatoes and your carrots. They have a lot better room to grow. Previously I had wooden beds and they were, I think, 6 inches high, and they worked great because they don't have bottoms. They can go into the ground still, but once they reach this hard clay here in Southern Virginia, potatoes and carrots are going to have a hard time growing in something like that. And that's the benefits of growing in a raised bed. You're getting your vegetables a great start because it's got a great soil to grow in. And so ultimately you're going to have a better harvest and it's going to produce more and better vegetables for you. So these containers, like I said, they are galvanized metal, and the links at rockfishfarm.com. Wooden ones are great too. The difference is these will last a whole lot longer. The beds that I previously had that were made of wood lasted about maybe 3 years or so, and they're starting to fall apart. Now, they did make 2 different moves to 2 different locations, but even still, they're not going to last quite as long as something like this. Now, it could be a little bit cheaper for the wood, depends, because wood is very expensive right now, so it's probably a better investment to go with something like a composite or metal, something like this. Okay, so we talked about the bottoms, and you can, the best thing to do is to not have a bottom because you want the roots to go down. And things like corn, they'll be a lot sturdier the more room that they have, especially to go down in that soil. You can grow absolutely anything in raised beds. Pumpkins, squash, beans, corn, flowers, strawberries. You can do anything. Anything you want to can be grown in a raised bed. Okay, so let's talk about the sizes. The size is completely up to you. There's lots of different sizes out there. It just kind of depends on what is going to suit you. So these beds that I have, they're about 9.5 by 4 feet wide, almost 4 feet wide. They're just under that. Those round beds over there, they are 4-foot round beds. And the ones that I built from wood, those were 4 feet by 12 feet. Those were a really good size. These are a great size too. So you do not want to go anything over 4 feet wide because you want to be able to reach into the center very easily, and when this thing is jam-packed midsummer, you do not want to be reaching over and into, nor will you probably be able to reach over and into the center to do your harvesting. You want to be able to stand on one side and be able to reach into the center very easily. So anything over 4 foot wide would be pretty difficult to do that. But there are, 2 feet wide, there's 3 feet wide, and then any length that you want is perfectly fine. So these containers, they are filled with a good raised bed soil. I believe the brand was Harvest Organics. There's lots of different brands. You can do Miracle-Gro, you can do, I think Stay Green makes one, but you want to get one that is specifically a raised bed container mix, and that way it is perfectly mixed to hold what you need in this container. Don't use something like a garden soil. Definitely don't use the soil from your ground, because that is the purpose of these raised bed containers, is to start with a great soil. It's going to defeat the purpose, and starting with a good clean mix like this is going to cut down on weeds. If you carry your garden soil, your regular garden soil into these beds, you're just carrying the weeds right into there. These beds, especially ones like these where they're 12 inches off the ground, They are not going to have any weeds in them, or hardly at all. If you do get a weed, like from the grass being mowed and something floating in here, it's very easily picked out, and so that it cuts down on your time. So these raised beds, they are a time saver once you get them set up. So obviously it's a bit of a time investment and a money investment to do gardening this way, but you only have to do it the one time. So I'm only filling this up this year, and then from here on out, each spring I will come in, I will add like some compost and a couple amendments until that end, and then it's done and it's ready to go. So the time after you get it set up is very minimal on this style of gardening. The other great thing about raised bed gardening is you're not constantly walking over top of it, compacting down the dirt. It is, you know, virtually weed-free, and it is a huge space saver. So when you do typical row gardening, you know, you have to have this big space because you need paths to walk down in between each of them, right? And space out your crops. With this, everything is in this one container, and it is jam-packed. You're going to plant up each one of these square foot spaces, and so you have less space with more vegetables in it. It also takes less water because you can water at the source, and everything kind of works together in this bed to keep each other happy. I feel like I am more successful at growing in raised beds than I am in the ground, mainly because I have 3 children and I don't have the time to maintain an in-ground garden and keep up with the weeds and the bugs and all that kind of stuff. This being off the ground helps with bugs and critters too. So all around, I would say the gardening style is my favorite by far, and I think you'll really like it too. And it's just a great way to garden. Okay, so let's talk about a plan. So we talked about the containers, we talked about the mix, we lay it out. So when you're doing raised bed gardening, you are thinking in squares, 1 foot by 1 foot squares, rather than in your rows. And so you can totally pretty much dismiss the spacing that you see on the back of the seed packet. So you can go to that website I told you, rockfishfarm.com, under gardening on the blog. There is a post where I listed out pretty much each vegetable and how many you can place per square foot. You can go by the seed packet. It's by the seed packet is what it is. It's just easier to think, oh, 4 per square foot for lettuce rather than 1 every 3 inches or whatever it is. So and I've got different lettuces, different varieties on there too, so that you know how many can go per square foot. So it's easier to think that way. So when you're making your plan, usually what I do, well, let's talk about layout first. So let's come back to the layout. I have this laid out with string. It is done with just regular string and some landscape pins, and I went and I marked out every square foot. So I have, this is a 9 by 4 foot bed. So I have 8 strings along the long side to give me 9 sections, and then 3 strings along the short side to give me 4 sections that way. Ultimately, I have 36 squares in here, so I can plant 36 different things if I want to. So I would highly recommend laying this out, especially if this is the first time you're doing this. It is very helpful and it looks very clean to me, and I would say the cheapest way to do it is with the landscape pins and the string. And that way it kind of gives you an idea of the squares that you're working in, and then you can learn and see like empty spots and what you can put there when, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, the succession planting. So lay it out so that you can see the squares that you're working with. When I have things like that trellis or vine, let's talk about vining plants. So vining plants I usually will put on the edges and they will come out the side. Things that I need to be trellised, you can trellis beans, you can trellis your tomatoes. I typically do them in the center or in the back of the bed. If you have things like your beans and your tomatoes, things that you do want to trellis, I would recommend putting the trellis down the center of the bed. I like to use, if you're going with an actual trellis, I like to use a cattle panel, something with a heavier gauge wire on it. It's just easier at the end of the season to remove the vegetables from it, but any type of fencing or trellising, material will be fine, string. it's just gonna be a little bit harder to remove at the end of the season. I found the cattle panels or the hog panels to be very beneficial. It's a little bit more of an expense in the beginning, but it's worth it, and they last really long and they stay really nice and straight. However, I personally don't like to use them in my raised beds. I've tried them, and I think that it takes up more space than you think. So yes, a tomato can take up 4 spaces if you're doing it with a tomato cage, but it only takes up 2 spaces with the trellis. But to me, I feel like I can use those 4 spots and have my tomato and still plant underneath of it. And same with my like beans. I prefer a bush bean over a vining bean. I just think they take up less space. Yes, they take up, you know, 1 square can plant 9 bush beans in it. And to me, that can hang out over the edge and take up less space than 9 of them growing up a trellis, when really they're kind of all coming together, and it can be kind of hard to pick in a bed like this. So I've done it, you know, in the center, I've done it at the back, I've done it, you know, a cattle panel going from one bed to the other and kind of having a walkthrough. But to be honest with you, I prefer the bush beans better, and I prefer just putting my tomatoes in a tomato cage in the center. That's me. You can do and try either way that you want to. So things that are taller, like your okra, your tomatoes, you know, anything that's taller or bushier, you want to put either in the center or on the edge of your bed, so that, you know, those taller things are in the center and you're not reaching over your tomato to get to your lower bush beans or your squash or anything like that. Things like zucchini that get really big, I try to do a bush, what is it called? I'm trying to think of what it's called. It's, anyway, it's not quite a vine and it's not quite a bush. It's kind of a little bit of the two. I can't think of what it's called. It's called something. Anyways, I put those on the ends of my bed and have them flop out over the side. Same with like squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, watermelons. Cucumbers I actually vine. I'll do them on the cheaper tomato cages. By the way, if you're going to do a tomato with a tomato cage, get the heavier gauged, nicer tomato cages. They are more expensive, but they will hold your tomato up a whole lot better. If you use those rinky-dink little tomato cages, your tomato will be flopping over by the end of the season, and you will probably lose it to disease and all kinds of things, which kind of defeats the purpose. Get the nicer tomato cage and make the investment. The smaller tomato cages you can use as pepper supports. I use them for cucumbers to crawl up, things like that. Come here. Or you can even do peas on them and use them as a pea support, little things like that. So, but the vining plants like the cucumbers, the watermelon, the things like that, they can grow right out over the edge. So let's talk about what's in between your beds. So you can actually have the grass, and I've done that, but I would put enough space between each bed so that you can run your lawnmower through to make it easy. It's going to make it a little bit difficult when those things vine out over the edge, so you can do some mulch, you can do some cardboard with some grass clippings on top of it as like a free way to have some mulch in between the beds. You can use regular mulch, you can use gravel. I've got gravel between all of these beds. We just set this garden up this year. And so it just makes it a little bit easier to have those vining plants when you have something in between the beds. But yes, you can just have grass between it. If you do have the grass between it, you might get a little bit more weeds in them. But like I said, they pull out very easily. Another tip with the cardboard, when you go to put your bed down, you don't have to dig out the grass. You don't have to kill it underneath. What you do, lay the bed down, lay some cardboard down, put your dirt right on top. You can plant on it right away. It's called a no-dig garden. Okay, so we've covered the containers, we've covered the mix, we've covered the layout of it, and getting it set up. I have a video on drip irrigation if you want to not water your beds, which is amazing, I will say. Midsummer, it's amazing to not have to water your beds, but honestly, it doesn't take that much time when you have this because it's all in one space. But you can watch that drip irrigation video and see how I'm setting up each of these beds on drip so that I don't have to hand water them. Let's talk about layout and making a plan, right? So that's what you want to do, right? So I would sit there and think about what things you want to grow. What are you going to eat the most of, or what do you think is going to be something that you're going to really enjoy growing in your garden? You're probably thinking tomatoes, you're probably thinking peppers, you're probably thinking maybe some lettuces, some squash, and I would go and do a little bit of research on those things. Go get your seeds, read the back of the seed packets, and also you can also pick up things that are already started at your garden center, like lettuces, broccoli, kale. All of the spring stuff is going to be ready for you at the garden center right now. So you can go get that, and you don't even have to worry about some of the seeds. Now, some of it obviously is better to start from seed, like your corn and squash, and it's just easier. And I've got another video coming for you that talks about seeds or plants, and so you can check that out here soon, right here on the channel, and see which ones you would prefer, whether you're doing seeds or plants. Okay, so I'll show you my notebook. I have on paper, I draw out each of my beds. I think about what I want to grow for that year and how much I want to grow. Okay, do I want a lot of squash? Do I want a lot of tomatoes? What do I want to grow? Okay, so then I will come in and I will draw out each of my beds, and I will even mark it out with the squares. And I will go to my chart on the website, and I will say, okay, my tomato, I want to grow 3 tomatoes in this bed. So each tomato takes up 4 spaces. And so I go ahead and I draw my tomato in those 4 spaces, put it in the center, and then, okay, what else am I growing? I'm going to put some peppers in this bed. They take up 1 space, so I'll write pepper in there. And I will go through and with everything that I want to grow, and I will lay it out in my garden bed. And that's a good way to have a plan when you go to plant too, because lettuce doesn't go in at the same time as a pepper does. So I know which square I can come out here at any point in the season and go, okay, my lettuce is going here, and then this spot stays open because that's going to be a pepper later. Okay, and that's a great way to succession plant as well. So lettuce, it's a spring crop, and you can get heat tolerant varieties, but in the summertime it's going to bolt a lot quicker. So I might have multiple spots where I put lettuce, but this one I start now, and then in 2 weeks I start that one. So that way this square, when it goes to bolt, I've got that one coming up and I can pick from that one, pull this one, start again. So 4 weeks after I've started this one, I'm putting in some more so that I have a continuous supply of lettuce and things like that. Okay, so I've gone through and I've laid out my one bed. If there's more that you want to grow, draw out a second bed and add to it that way, so that you can get, you can see how many beds you need for compared to how many beds you need to purchase, okay, and how many vegetables that you want to plant. Okay, so make your layout. Let's talk about spacing a little bit. Most of it is going to come from that website with that chart that I have for you. And it's going to make it a lot easier rather than sitting and looking at these seed packets and going, okay, 3 inches, how many can go per square? Just go look at that chart. It makes it a whole lot easier. I use that chart every year, and that's how I plan how many can go. So more than one thing can go per square. So you're going to see some things like your romaine lettuce, you can do 4 of them per square. I've got my onions already planted. I can do 4 onions per square. So you need to sit and think about, okay, and then you've got tomatoes where they get a little bit bigger and you can only put 1 of them per 4 squares. But the bottom space is open, and this is something that you'll learn from year to year, but the bottom space is open. You can stick some of your lettuces under there so that you can utilize every spot in this bed. You don't want to leave a whole section open for any amount of time unless you're saving it for a couple weeks for when like a fall plant goes in or a spring is done and you're waiting to plant it up for summer. Utilize every single spot in your bed. This is such a great space saver. Let me turn this around. I want to show you. I've got some rocks laid out here. I kind of want to show you when it says like 5 per square, 9 per square, and you're going to look at some of those things on there and you're going to go, bush beans, I can do 9 of them per square. Yes, you can. I have tried it. I thought in the beginning that was way too many. I said, no way that is going to grow and produce a great crop. It does. I ended up trying it last year and I was like, believe it or not, it produces a great crop, 9 per square. So let's turn this around. Let's take a look at this and talk about spacing a little bit. Okay, you can see in this bed I've already got my onions planted. Nothing else is planted in this bed yet. I'm hoping to get some spring seeds in here pretty soon. But you can see that's why it's so beneficial, because if I go put seeds in here, I'm not going to know if I've got something hiding, but that's where my plan comes into play, so I know exactly what's in this bed at any given time. Okay, so my onions are 4 per square, and you can see you're working in 1 foot by 1 foot sections to plan out your garden. Something like a tomato will take 4 squares if you're doing it like I suggested with the tomato cage. So you would place it in the middle of the square. And some plants actually can take up, like that tomato, more, like a zucchini. I would plant a zucchini always on the edge of your bed so it falls out over the edge, or any type of, you know, like a pumpkin or something like that. It'll take up more than 1 square, but then it'll flop out over the edge or vine out over the edge. So you put it in the center of the 2 squares that you're working with. All right, so something like 4 per square foot, like my onions, or some romaine lettuce. You just space it out like this evenly. Okay, 3 per square foot. This is how I lay out my corn. So I typically do a whole bed of corn, and so I will lay them out like this. So 1 square would be in like a triangle like this. The next square would be in a triangle the same way, and that way it's kind of giving a little bit more space. You've got 1, 2, then 1, 1, 2, then 1. So it's kind of giving the space between all of the different sections. Okay, 2 per square foot would be laid out like this, corner to corner, giving it the most amount of space. 9 per square would be 3 rows of 3. It's kind of like that, that middle school math is coming into play here in this garden. And 5, you would do something like this. You would do your 4 corners and then 1 in the center. I hope this has been helpful to you. I know this is just like the basics and getting your thoughts together and getting yourself set up for the season in 4 square foot gardening. I hope that you give this way a try because I think you will really enjoy it. It's really a great way to garden. It is my favorite way to garden. But I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope to show you more throughout the season of what my garden looks like and how to plant and take each vegetable from planting to harvest. We gotta come over here to the swings now to swing, but I hope this is helpful to you, and I would love to do a future Q&A video. If you still have questions about square foot gardening, I would love for you to comment them below, and hopefully I will get one of those together here soon. And thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.